We're recording, man.
We're here. We're
We
here.
are we are using technology, man. We are
We are
we
using
we're not too bold yet.
the fancy technology that we can be in two locations and two parts of the world and
I,
talk.
I know. It's
I
amazing.
know. I know.
So man, Tavio, introduce yourself for those who don't know you.
Well, my name is Tavio Sawyer. I do branding and graphics as well as do fire spinning. And those are two of the passions that I um, like to keep myself involved in and like to share insights where I can from these two things. So yeah, that's who I am, and that's what I stand for.
Well, it's a good thing you didn't have me introduce you because I would have added so many other things to that description of who you are. But I would also argue that you're a philosopher and you're also a debater in some sense. You're an intellectual, I will say that much. So
Well, thank you. I
at least
agree.
I consider you to be. So
I'm
I
like, I
appreciate.
agree. I agree with all these statements you make. I agree with those because I believe that we both have the same like-mindedness, and so this is easy to have a conversation with you because we like to talk about the same things and glean off the same ideas. So, this will be a really encouraging conversation, like I always expect it to be. So, what's the topic today, my guy?
Okay, so let me lay the groundwork.
All
I
right, let's
was
do it.
I started reading this book from Heather Hying and Bret Weinstein.
Okay.
And in the very beginning, they say something which I think you and I will find very interesting, especially as creative people and for those that are listening that may be creative people as well. Um, they say the accelerated rate of change in the modern world has outstripped the capacity of our brains and bodies to adapt. The cognitive dissonance spawned by trying to live in a society we are not built for is killing us. Now, this can go a bunch of different directions, but specifically when we think about creative people who are making a living off of their talents, not just, and I want to make a distinction here, not creative people that do it as a hobby and are just very productive and lucrative and share their creativity, but people that are specifically relying on, maybe they went to school to be a designer or a website developer or something, and the people that are relying on those skills to earn money to pay their bills for their income, when they say that we're not built for this society, that we can't adapt, it's essentially a problem of hyper novelty. There's so many new things happening that we just can't keep up. And so I start to wonder, well, how is that going to affect artists, creative people who are working within corporate or let's just say in the world, the business world, making a living off of their talents? Um, and the reason I bring this up is because I've seen more and more listings looking for like unicorns. Uh, they put that in the listing. Somebody that's like a pro web editor and a graphic designer and no HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and like all these insane things that no person, or if they did have any interest in all those subjects, would probably not be very proficient at. But for some reason, we see this in the market that people seem to think creative people should just be everything. And yet, so what does that mean for the people that are earning a living in one discipline, maybe as a graphic designer or a one position? What does that mean for them? What does the future mean for them? This hyper novelty. Um,
Sure.
what do you think?
I think that it's a necessity. Um, I I think creatives in this perspective, I can probably equate it to a car, um, and how cars technology have put more demands on what we want to receive out of a car, um, due to due to the level of which The creativity in a car has stepped up and the technology has stepped up. I mean, there's not a lot of people driving old cars unless for nostalgic reasons, but they lack a lot of the features that new cars have. And a lot of people who expect to buy a new car almost demand the features. There's no heated seats. Wait, hold on. There's no this, there's no that. So I feel like that's just a necessity. It's like a something that we've always done, where we always expect to upgrade, because we pursue this idea called success and being better and improving. And so to be like stuck in one type of skill set is has never been good in any type of situation. Like, sure, there is that master where you can kind of like really hone in on that skill set, but that skill set usually has upgrades within itself. The technology doesn't consistently stay the same. So somebody just staying a graphic designer, realizing that our technology allows everyone to be a graphic designer, and now that technology is so accessible that there are people who are no longer just using that one technology, but now you're competing with tons of people who are like, no, 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 I'm not using just Photoshop. I'm using Illustrator, Photoshop. I'm also using all these other programs and things like that. And they are almost are like, they force the people who are stuck in that kind of old way to step up. Like, they need to step up. If they don't, then they become obsolete in a lot of ways, in my opinion. What do you think?
Let let me share some. This is a real experience that I lived and witnessed, and this is one of the reasons this concerns me is because so back in the day when I first started DJing, my first paid gig, it was like right, it was I think it was November. I was 16, so it was I was not even 17 yet. Um, a professional DJ, and when I say a professional DJ, I mean somebody who was recognized in Las Vegas as somebody that played clubs, played raves, and people knew their name, right?
Yeah.
So I would bump into these guys occasionally at record stores, and they'd notice like, oh, you're buying the same record I'm buying, and you'd form this friendship. And it was a small group of maybe like a dozen DJs, um, but they all kind of looked out for each other. And I remember this one guy, his name DJ Speedy, sold me my first drum machine. He said, "Man, you're a really good DJ. You have a ton of potential." He's like, "I'm gonna get you booked." He's like, "But don't you dare accept anything less than $300 for the night." Okay, and this was 1999.
Right.
Okay, so $300 for the night. So the night ended. I come on at 2 a.m. I play till 4:30. The rave ends. I find the promoter and I say, "Hey, can I get my money?" And he's like, "Yeah, how much do I owe you?" And he's got like a 50 pulled out. And I'm like, $300. And he's like, $300? He's like, "This is your first gig." And I'm like, "No, $300, And he was like, oh, like he was all pissed off, but he pulled out $300 and gave me $300 and walked away. I never charged less than $300 since then because I'm like, okay, that's the rate. But then what started happening is because nobody could really afford two Technics turntables and a mixer and learn how to get good, you started getting all these cheaper turntables, and you had younger kids getting them for Christmas presents and all this stuff, and they're learning how to, thinking they can mix, and they start coming up into the clubs, approaching the clubs and the rave promoters and saying, "Hey, we'll play for free, just put my name on a flyer." So
Right.
then the promoters are like, "All right, I'll try it." And they start experimenting with things and realizing that, wait, this like sacred price that no DJ was supposed to charge less than is now being corrupted because these young kids are coming in. They don't have the skills, the professionalism, the understanding of beat matching, mixing and key, and all these different higher elevated skills. And we can hear that and we think this is insane. And these promoters start booking these kids, and then none of us can make a living as professional DJs anymore because no one will pay that.
Mm-hmm.
So then what happens? We go into different fields. I shift gears. We've all shifted gears. I think there's only one person left out of all those guys that are still DJing professionally. And
Mm,
even then, it's only here and there, you know? So that's scary to see a whole, like, it's almost like you look at these people as like gods because they have set such a high standard and they turned it into an art form. They turned DJing into an art form. And
mhm.
then you see that art form kind of diluted by other DJs that don't have the skill. They can't beat match. They don't know how to mix records together to create a continuous vibe, all these things that they just don't understand.
Right, right.
They don't understand people's progression throughout the night. And so all that stuff changes. And it's like, well, I see it slip away and I see it slipping away as you just described for people that are. So shouldn't that scare people? Like, shouldn't creative people, when they hear this, shouldn't they be scared shitless, basically?
I think they should be scared at the idea that they could be obsolete. I think that should be a fear, but at the same time, I think it's kind of like what you do with the fear. You can either go back to school and train more. I was playing the game of life with my kids yesterday, and there's a part where it says, "Do you want to go back to school?" You know, do you want to like give up your career and go back to school? And a lot of people have to do that in their lives, you know, where they have to reassess their positioning in what they're doing in their career, and then question, do I need to add more value to my positioning? And the thing is that people are willing to pay the price for a DJ if they believe that DJ is worth their value. If they believe that, I don't fucking care. I don't care if it's so and so. I know that Jarrett, when he throws down, it is a banger. Woo! Right? And so, you know, so so because there are the people who are getting paid still well at high prices with their DJing in this example, but they had to really start like digging into their own craft. They had to start digging into like these elements. They had to start really getting into the business side of it. That's an art form in itself. That's creative in itself. And a lot of creatives who are musicians don't want to go that direction because they didn't want to diversify that aspect of them because they didn't want to add that to their full stack portfolio. Hey, you need to have this skill now. And I think as like maybe entrepreneurs, they're forced to have to put on all these hats. They're forced to put on all these skills that they have to do. While like in the corporate environment, it really they're in the beginning they just wanted a singular, hey, I just want this and I want that. But now I think due to so many of the world being creative and putting on all these hats and jazz like that, the people who are, you know, used to the old structure, maybe they were the ones that helped pave the way. Doesn't mean they get to stay in the way. A lot of musicians fall off, but they help inspire that next generation who happen to probably step over you or step over the musicians who are there. But it's not because they are inherently bad. They're just so in desire and so hungry of this new creative expression and seeing how much opportunity they're seeing these things. At least the new creatives are the ones who don't have as many skills, say, as the older ones. They're it seems like they're hungrier right now, and they're fighting for that food, while the other ones might not be as hungry. They might hold a little bit more complacency, and those things I think are very fearful if you don't recognize that aspect. And 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 eventually it will start eroding your desire of actually doing the job. And and it's almost like, okay, well, you're going to have to do something else, time to go back to school, do something else, whatever the case. And people do, they move on because maybe they stop their desire at that threshold, while others are like, no, 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 I'm still going to I'm doing this. And then they go back to school within their own art, and they try to upgrade, and they try to still set performances where they can still have their value, because people pay for your value. The people who don't want to pay for your value, don't do anything with them. You know, like, I mean, because they are going to always look at the price before anything else. They're always going to like devalue your work. Like, it should be to the people who are looking at your music and looking at what you're expressing. And barring if you did it for 10 months or you did it for 10 years, the value of your work is something where people are like, hey, man, that's worth paying for. I'm not going to pay $50 for it. The artist is like, no, it's worth this much. I've had the respect that it has here. You can see it, you can hear it. It sounds like you really want it. Um, but if you think that someone else at a cheaper value or a kid who hasn't, have full experience in it yet is worth more than me, then I probably suggest that you probably want to be with them anyways, because we're probably not going to have a good conversation because I'm going to feel devalued by giving you my services and you're not reciprocated in the same value point that I'm seeing at. So we're not seeing eye to eye here. And so now I have to really assess for myself, do I need to increase or up my value? And I think about this especially with fire performing because there's points in times where I have to do these busk type things where you go out and you have that hat and you throw money in and then you realize you're like, well, what will guarantee somebody to put money in my hat? Like what would make them feel that this is valuable? Like
Mhm.
and I observe it a lot because I realize is if I keep on staying to the same like structure that I'm at, I'm only going to receive that same value of money getting thrown in. Maybe I need to start considering adding more choreography, adding more performance style, adding more people, putting more accessibility of where people can purchase, giving more options of purchase, like QR codes instead of just change, like being much more moldable and not so like structured and set in your way or set in the way. um, I think will allow any artist to expand and people to actually see the value. But you're right. I think due to the high amount of consumption that we're receiving today, everybody has higher standards of what they want. They want more. And that's an unnatural thing, which I do agree. But and that could be a scary thing. But at the
Well, and
same,
we're also consumers in that,
exactly.
because, you know, now more people are working from home. People are streaming a whole season of a show while they're also working from home. And it's like
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
consume that much binge watching, Netflix would need to produce an entire season every
Yeah.
other day, maybe,
Right.
of
Right.
of your favorite show. And so it's like there's so much more content, and there is potential, but at the same time, I just can't help it. I don't know if it's just me getting cynical, but it's like I see these things as kind of slipping away. And I do agree that a real creative person, again, I think people mistake, just because you might have learned to copy somebody else's talent doesn't necessarily make you a true creative person. And what you said earlier about entrepreneurs, they're looking to solve problems. And I
Hmm.
think that that is kind of the natural state of where a creative person is most happy. It's they're transforming that chaos, the stuff that doesn't really make sense, into some sort of an understandable, logical order that can then be disseminated to other people and helped. And I think that's like the ultimate zenith of when an artist feels most in flow, like they feel good about the work they completed for the day. It has an effect on other people. Um, so is the question just that as artists we can't become too nostalgic for our own past, or how we have defined ourselves in the past, and we have to not be offended at being, like you said, remolded, but that also means being redefined and using new
Hmm.
words that maybe we're not comfortable with, you know um
Yeah. I agree. I
and
agree. I
so
think you're right. I think with artists, you know how when artists have to release an album, and sometimes their whole entire album just sounds completely different because
yeah.
they, as an artist, has changed completely and they've molded. And sometimes it's for good. Some people like it, and some people don't. But I think it's a necessity for all creatives because we're transitioners. We we're kind of used to having all these problems and issues, and that we have to figure out and then create some singular solution to it, or singular sound to it, or singular whatever. And that's cool. But I do believe that creatives also get really complacent. And because of that complacency, um, the times like move so much faster than, and then you see those like, you see the like movies where they're like, move over, old man, a new person's in town. And you can see that the person who had so much equity in the art that they produced and helped pave the way have a hard time leaving that, and like just transitioning to the new experience of what the times are asking for, and who you are within the times. So I do think that it's not a bad thing that these things are happening. I think it's by nature, this is what we do. But not now, not in the room now. I can hear everything. Sorry, I apologize. I'm like, dude, I told you guys not to come in the room. Not now. I told you not now.
Kids are always welcome, right?
It's like crinkle, crinkle, crack, crack. Kids. No, but that's my thought. I do agree. I do agree that it's just there's a lot going on. There's a lot of things going on in regards to what a creative needs to be nowadays, and it's almost too much, because I think that more creatives are burnt out because of it. I think that's why we're having like a lot of overload. I think we're consuming too much, and I think we're also like creating too much in a sense, because this world has so much now. It's flooded with creative options and opportunities. Um, but so we consume it, but at the same time we're producing more, and because of that there's a rise in higher demand upon what creatives need to export, which
So
is
that I want to segue. I think this is a good point to segue into um, another topic, which is this is why I feel the multiverse or the metaverse, whatever it's called, the metaverse is
yeah.
inevitable. Because like if you've seen Blade Runner 2049, like
Mhm.
that's probably what it will feel like. You'll be walking down the street and an ad will just pop up right next to you. You might
Mhm.
see a naked woman in Las Vegas, bending over right in front of you.
Mhm.
Like that's probably how experiences will become. And maybe you're 21 and over and only certain things show that. I don't know how all that will work, but that is what I see. And what's crazy is that is like experience taken to like the nth degree, because you're like wrapped in an experience within an experience within an experience. And it's like, at what point does the objective real world no longer matter anymore? And then that becomes scary for other reasons, because you think, well, two things could happen. What if you somehow got banned or censored or got ejected out of the metaverse, or Apple or whatever they have, whatever big tech puts together into where we're all into this connected experience? If you get banned or kicked out of that, like if you've been so dependent on that connection and that network of people,
Right.
like, and then you get ejected, like that's scary in ways that I don't think humans have ever thought about or dealt with, or what that may even be like. Or two, like, how does that change our perception and our consumption, and how much we can actually create and produce, and how much we can control it? Because we're creating so many things now that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't think any of us have the enough foresight or vision, no matter how visionary we are or what supplements you take to try to become visionary. I don't think anybody can fully foretell all of the negative consequences that a new technology may have. I don't think we'll know the full consequences of Twitter or Facebook or social media or any of these things, or even kids growing up with texting and stuff, until much, much later.
I agree.
And at the rate that everything is exponentially increasing, will we get to a point where we actually drive ourselves into extinction? Because the real world is still there. There's still bears out there. There's still real things that can kill
Mhm.
you,
Yeah.
you know, and
I agree with that. And I think it's to piggyback off of that and to kind of go back to that car example, is the speed of things is speeding up so fast. But and we know this, like texting and the metaverse and all these things, they're growing so quickly. And kind of equating it back to a car, like we knew that a car had, as a technology piece, we knew that it would advance us as a human civilization, but we probably weren't aware of all the accidents that it might cause. I mean, we probably were aware that it could have accidents, and I mean, there are the variables, but as we increased in our speed of a car, we start to realize how much we have no control, and when it finally hits, it's a very traumatic thing. It's not going 15 miles per hour. Now you're going 70 miles per hour, and that's the standard. These are the standards of driving speeds. These are the things
and
where
most people go above and beyond that.
above
They
it,
go,
right? And they
yeah.
go above it. So just in the same sense of our technology and everything like that, that speed, if we keep on going at these higher and higher speeds, we have to consider that they might, what does the collisions look like? Because they will happen. We will have collisions. Will they be just as detrimental as a collision in a car would be? Like at going at those high speeds, because I could see that. I could see the metaverse. I can also see when you're talking about like we're going to be on this road where we're living in a world that is almost superficial, and what is it going to be like to be ousted from that system? What, like we already know what which is like a disfellowshipping or any type of casting out of any type of system leaves a person really emotionally broken. So just imagine that you now have 4,000 friends and you have all these people you're connecting to. It's a bigger world now that you get kicked out of. How much more so? Who are you talking to? So I can see that it could have a lot of car crashes in our emotions based upon that.
In our
Um,
psychology,
yeah, in our psychology.
we have to think a little bit more about in these future technologies what these crashes, or like you were saying, the car crashes, what these crashes of these future experiences look like for people. And to
Right.
me, they seem much more psychological and
Hmm.
emotional than
Hmm.
maybe physical, right?
Yeah.
Or I mean, they're still physical, but
Yes.
much more
Yeah.
manipulative.
Completely. The car crashes in this illustration, I use the car as a physical example, but the car crashes that I'm speaking of, and the speediness of how we are through our technology and through our creativity, we are emotionally becoming. It's an emotionally dangerous speed that we have to consider. That we are now are tapping into an area where it could lead to a high depression rate, could lead to all these emotional things that we will probably need more psychology and psychological help, because I think there's going to be a big industry to support this type of thing, because there's going to be just by study alone, there's going to be a lot of accidents because there's more cars, and so there's more technology, there's more opportunities, there's more creatives doing the things that they're doing, and it's going to be and it's all kind of around the storyline of money. And when I say that, I just mean like our economy, our marketplace, everything is based upon this value system, and since that value system makes us have to relook at our art every you know year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever the case, it's going to be a really emotionally stressful time period. So I would highly recommend for people to, especially creatives, is really trying to find that like center of yourself, that root, like what really is driving you to do and create what you're creating, and really kind of focus on that singular like root of your purpose, of who you are. Remind yourself of these things, and that can emotionally help you with the trials of how much is going on nowadays.
Well, and that brings up something that my wife and I, Carrie, were talking about with, because as a teacher, I can't believe that the education system is not being discussed as this technology is so rapidly advancing. Because what's so interesting is she specializes in pre-K education,
Hmm.
and they have a very different focus than when you get into kindergarten. They talk about treating the whole child, so the psychological, the developmental, like every aspect of the child. As soon as you get into kindergarten, it takes a hard turn, and it's suddenly like trying to make factory workers still. And
Exactly.
the
Yep.
fact that that hasn't changed, we've tried relying on these institutions for so long, and I think what everyone is realizing is they've all let us down, like all these institutions. And so what I see happening is a whole renaissance or a revolution in learning, and that autodidact mentality of, why am I learning all this crazy calculus and all the stuff that maybe I will never use, when I don't even know psychologically my own temperament or
Hmm.
how that affects me in the workplace? Like, just some of the most basic fundamental things that you think people should know, they're not taught. And
Hmm.
that is a huge problem that I see, that kids are still going to school to be something that our society doesn't even really make anymore, right? I mean,
I
who's a
agree.
factory worker these days? Like, that's this, it's so antiquated. And yet then they get spit out into the real world expecting to just adapt. And it's like, it's such a dysfunctional system that, to
Yeah.
me, like, all these things have to start aligning if we're going to make our society better.
That's a good point that you bring up of the education system and maybe the timeline in which kids are no longer working on their emotional and psychological developments as much as they're working on what their job position are what the requirements of getting a job start to implement into their life. So now it's starting to have this factory based thing of like, all right, you need to have math, science, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. And let's not talk about like the emotional development sides of anything. It's much more of like, these are the things that will get you a job. These are the things that will, that you need to process. And like you said, I think that education system requires and will have a paradigm shift of a renaissance. I think in the Renaissance time they called it ad fontes, where they went back to the fountain. And there's probably going to be a point when we, as a society, will do the same thing. We're going to reassess our whole education program. Um, well, I hope reassess our whole education program to be more prepared for the times that we're living in, for not just creatives, but just for people in general, because this is a thing that like it spans throughout all the industries that we have. It's just right now, I do believe and do see just it's just so much creatives out there that now it's stressful for creatives to find work. It's stressful because we're fighting against each other. We're competing against each other. We're in this competition, and and it can definitely be, it's definitely going to be something that is different from the time when I started doing all this design and jazz like that. And looking at it now, like I also was just like, all right, man, I need to start upgrading, changing, looking for other avenues if I want to stay in this industry. If not, then maybe I just go and do something else. um, but I do believe you're right, like upgrading our education to be much more relevant to our time will be is necessary for us to have maybe the success that we are hoping to see within ourselves. You know.
Well, and that applies to us too, because like you were saying, to continue learning, we kind of have this idea that maybe learning stops when we get out of college or when we graduate high school, but that's not the right framing of it. Like, maybe learning should be a lifetime thing that you always do.
Should.
um, so a lot of things, to me, I think creative people can benefit. Instead of coming away from this and being depressed, learn how to reframe something. Reframe what you're looking at. There's so many expressions, you can't see the forest for the trees and all these types of things, and it's like, we know that like if you become too focused on one thing, you can't see the bigger picture. uh, and so sometimes we do need to step back a little bit, and we need to figure things out. And it is, I see a positive potential world for creative people. I also see a lot of that decaying and starting to fall away. And so it's kind of a weird time, I think, for at least me to be alive, because I see a transitioning happening.
Sure.
I think we all do after coming through COVID. And I
Yeah.
don't think any of us have fully processed the weight of the last 2 years and all the manipulation. And the last thing I just want to mention is, I just have to say, man, like, I know that these topics are controversial, and COVID and vaccines and all that stuff, but to see how quickly the average, like, mainstream narrative just, it was like so quickly everyone just started believing it and
Yes.
acting it out. And that's scary, because it's like, well, wait, I have facts that are challenging what you're saying, but yet I'm supposed to believe your fake reality over mine.
Right.
Like, so it really puts people that maybe see things differently, like creative people like us that see, try to look at the bigger picture. It takes more courage for us, because we kind of get attacked because we stand out, right? We've had this conversation before.
Yeah.
The tallest poppy is the one to get cut down first, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, if you look too odd too soon, we know that, that's why zebras are in herds, so they don't stand out. And it's like, so that's always a risk benefit ratio too, that I think creative people have to keep in mind, is how creative do I want to be, because that puts a target on your back too. So I think it's, the creative person nowadays has to focus not just on getting good at their skill. They have to learn business. They have to learn how to communicate. They have to learn how to see into the future, at least 5 years down the road. Um,
I
it's
agree.
be, it's becoming much more multifaceted than it
Yeah.
used to be. And also, the population of the world has almost doubled since I was born in
Right.
1982. So I mean, there's
Right.
just way more people.
There's too many people. And just to kind of piggyback off those points, um, I think creatives now, if they haven't already, and when I went to college, and I went to art school, they proposed a singular theory, and they said art is a business. They said not enough artists look at art as a business. They look at it just as art, where they can express themselves, which is true. That is a form of art, but when you want to get into the realm of make it in your living, you have to really consider what business is, because that's an art form in itself. That's a creative outlet in its own. There's really really creative business people, who have problem solved all these different business strategies to grow their business in these beautiful creative ways. And I think, for the creatives who are not creative in business but more creative in, say, maybe music or I mean, like images, pictures, fire, whatever the case is, that more creatives are going to have to start looking at their life as an entrepreneur. And as an entrepreneur, you're not just a singular type of creative. You're a creative who is uh, like a renaissance man. You're putting in a lot of facets now within yourself to be like, hey, I'm a valuable source because I know how to, like, not just create the elements or assets in my business. I also know how to promote, market, share, connect with other people to help in all these things. Like, those are all avenues in which a creative can still be creative, but they're going to have to step outside of their comfortabilities of just staying in that one genre and not expanding outside of it. It almost limits who you are, because we as people are so dynamic, and we can do so many things, and we've proven it throughout the centuries, and we prove it today. I mean, just as many people who have to apply for a job, they can't just have one skill anymore. They have to have multiple skills, and it's because that bar has been set by all these other people who have put all the skill set in, and showed off so well that it started to become the standard that we all have to like live up to. Um, so man, our standard's going to keep on getting higher and higher and higher, in my opinion, because it just seems like that's what humans do. But there will be a point, and I still believe there will be a point that it might pop. There might be a, it's like how fast can we go? How fast can we go until something goes, like it's going to reset, and we might have to start, over, you might say, or look at how we're producing our art and our creativity as a world, as a civilization, and consider that what we're doing and what we're producing now affects the entire planet.
Yeah, and that's scary in a number of ways, because I mean, you think about it, if everybody becomes so enraptured in the virtual reality, you're not
Mhm.
paying attention to objective, reality around you, and then a
Right.
nuclear bomb just goes off one day and it's like you're gone.
Right.
So the other concern I have too is that, because of, you mentioned competition and more creatives trying to do more things, there are going to be people that are, not, they're careless, and they come up with technologies and they release them, maybe even open source, and it creates, I mean, it really disrupts things. Like, we don't know what Web 3.0 is even going to do.
Right.
um, and yet we already see this emerging technology, and I'm young enough to remember when the internet was still new, and it's like, what is this thing?
Yeah.
And then there's, the sites that you can't access, and I mean, there's still other worlds that we haven't really fully explored, everybody. But in that haste to try to be entrepreneurial and create something new, what if some creative one day accidentally creates something way bigger, metaphorically speaking, than a hydrogen bomb, let's say, like the
Right.
internet's version of a hydrogen bomb,
Hydrogen bomb. I
and it
agree.
just boom, like it
Boom.
goes off, and you had
Boom.
no way of seeing that it was going to be co-opted in a negative way, or um, some
Yeah.
company says, hey, we're going to buy this for $20 million, and you're like, woo, I'm rich, and the next thing you know, it's like destroying the world. So it's like, and that's, yeah, intention is everything, man. So
It
as
is. It is.
artists, we have to know why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like we got to consider that the creatives are also the reason why the world might have a lot of pollution. Um, because we're also producing, and I'm not saying just creatives alone, but just we are also producing things that are damaging the world in a lot of ways, material wise. We have a lot more excess waste, and that excess waste has logos on it. This excess waste has design intentions put into it. Every plastic bottle was designed by some designer. It's like it was a great thing. A creative made something so great, but then it gets produced in a way that maybe is not beneficial for our world and is not sustainable. And I think as creatives, especially the new ones, just really, really honing in on the idea of keeping this planet alive, and sustainability on top of that. Like, I think that's another thing that creatives are going to start having to problem solve for and help change the paradigm of this world, because it's always been the creatives that help change the world, help change the perspective of how people see things, and that's where I have a lot of hope in our future creatives, is that they're not doing this for the money. Like, I understand we have to do it for the money, but also there's a part where it has to be done for the integrity of humans, like keeping us alive, and not just for the money, because sometimes the money has made more excess waste than to make anything that holds value of life. Uh, that's all just kind of like temporary stuff. So I do have a lot of hope in in the new creative revolution of people to just keep that in mind, have an entrepreneurial spirit, but at the same time keep that spirit wanting the earth to stay alive, and be
Well,
conscious of what you're doing with and who you're working with. I mean, I don't know. That's
Well,
just
and
my
that's concerning, because there are certain thinkers that believe that even humanity is a cancer to this planet and should be
exactly.
eradicated at all costs. And it's like, you know, some of these ideas, and it's weird because I was just reading today how the Jungian, Carl Jung, Jungian psychology only works really on creative people. Non-creative people, it doesn't work. But which
Really?
is getting into a whole other
What?
topic. But that's
What?
it's very visionary and archetypal, right? It's very much in
Uh-huh.
the world of the dream. Um,
Yeah.
but it applies to, it works on creative people. And I think it is helpful for creative people to remember, just like what we said with pre-K, we need to continue to address the entire person, because creatives working in that 9 to 5 or 12 hours, 16 hours a day, whatever some people are working, that is self-destructive to your own soul, man. Like
It is.
you can stop being creative because you're so exhausted and so burnt out. And so
Exactly.
we need to take vacations, we need to take time to disconnect,
Yes.
we need to value our whole
This is so true.
body, our whole
So
soul.
true. So true. There's the one thing all creatives know, especially when it gets into the ad digital world, whatever, is burnout. And burnout is a real thing, and it can last for a long time. It could be a short time, but creatives get put on a high demand to export all this creativity out every day, each and every day, and it's not valued and valued. You know, people ridicule your work as well as praise your work all in like a singular day. So all these emotion, and it's like again, you're getting, to me, I feel like when you create something, you've created a baby that you emotionally connected to, and then you have to give it away. It's like, and then you hope that the person that receives it values the baby just as much as you value the baby, and often they don't. And you have to get used to that heartache and pain of separating yourself from that. And so all these elements can definitely add to a creative's burnout. And so, like you said, taking breaks, being conscientious of your time and your space. That a creative definitely needs to recharge. They can't just go on forever. And even if you believe you can, you are only going on just because your battery is full. But it's going to have to need a recharge at some point. Um, so just constantly being aware of the idea that you need to recharge, give yourself some time, and try to reduce the ability to burn out, which I don't think our ancient ancestors had that because the demand of work wasn't so heavy, you know, as it is today, um, on expressing our creativity and building a new world for ourselves. So, yes, I agree with that, man. Definitely take some time, recharge.
I think that's a great place to end it, man.
Oh yeah,
So,
okay.
Tavio, thank you for your time, man.
Jarrett, thank you for yours. Sorry for the mass interruptions.
It's
It's
all
like,
good, man. It's all good. I love these conversations, man.